Shiki is a troubled, ugly teenager who is one bad day away from mag dumping his entire class. Unsurprisingly, he was expelled from his school for his bad behavior, mostly because he kept threatening to use his classmates as targeting practice. He tries to act like he doesn't care about the fact that he got expelled, but honestly, with the way his life is going right now, he knows he's probably going to be stuck flipping burgers at Mickey D's for the rest of his life. A few moments later, Shiki's dad comes charging into the room and smacks Shiki on the head because he just received the letter informing him of Shiki's expulsion. He can't believe Shiki went and got himself expelled from school like that, and he's so mad that he tries to smack Shiki again, but Shiki already adapted to the attack pattern, so he dodges and jumps back onto his bed. His dad calms himself down after that, but he still wants an explanation from Shiki because he wants to know why he was expelled. He also wants to know how Shiki managed to get all the guns he keeps in his room because having this stuff isn't cheap or legal for that matter. He tells Shiki he needs to stop acting like this before he ruins his life, but hearing that strikes a nerve with Shiki. So he yells at his dad and says he's glad they aren't related by blood because he'd never want to end up like him. That last part really hurts Shiki's dad's feelings, and Shiki knows he took it too far, but before either of them can say another word, the phone rings down in the liquor store Shiki's dad owns, so he heads down to answer it. When he answers the phone, he is surprised to find out that it's a large beer delivery order, but he doesn't get many customers, so he is happy to comply. He heads out in his car to make the delivery, and once Shiki sees him leave, he decides to try some target practice and starts muttering to himself about how he wishes things hadn't turned out this way. All of a sudden, he hears a loud crash sound outside his room, and a moment later, he gets dragged out onto the street by a rope of black mist. Shiki is incredibly disoriented by the fall, and by the time he realizes what's going on, a man named Samudare slowly walks out of the smoke, and he seems to know who Shiki is. Just then, a car comes out of nowhere to ram Samudare into a wall, and once he stops moving, Shiki's father yells for Shiki to get in immediately. Shiki doesn't question it and immediately jumps into his dad's car, but once they are presumably safe, he starts asking a lot of questions. First of all, he wants to know why some crazy man just dragged him out onto the street and why his dad was so calm about killing him with a car back there. Shiki's dad tells him that there's no way someone like Samudare would die from getting run over by a car. Shiki still has no idea what's going on, so his dad decides that it's time to tell him the truth. He informs Shiki that he is a descendant of the Oni, and Samudare is a descendant of Momotaro, which is why he is so hell-bent on hunting Shiki down. Shiki is so stunned that he doesn't know what to say, and there's a lot more to the story, but his dad doesn't have time to explain all the details because it looks like Sami has caught up to them. Black mist begins to surround the car, and it begins to break down, so Shiki's dad is forced to drive into a nearby abandoned factory so they can get out. After getting out, Shiki turns back and sees the car covered in that strange black mist from before, but before he can ask what that stuff is, the car goes up in a massive ball of flames. In all the chaos, Shiki's dad takes his eyes off Shiki for a second, and in that short time frame, Shiki's butt was kidnapped by the Samudare. Inside the warehouse, Samudare uses his black mist to restrain Shiki in the air. When he is asked why he is doing this, all he has to say is that all who possess Oni blood are nothing more than pests to be exterminated. Samudare is about to execute Shiki once and for all, but before that could happen, Shiki's dad shows up to stop him. As he walks in, he explains that all the legends of Momotaro and the Oni are true, and the battle has been raging on for millennia now. Across the generations, the descendants of Momotaro had all taken up the duty of eliminating the Oni, which is how the Momotaro Agency was formed. Shiki is still confused about all this, but his dad never expected a failure like him to understand immediately anyway. For now, he tells Shiki to just stay put and let him handle Samudare, but as soon as Samudare hears that Shiki's dad intends to challenge him, he creates two swords out of the black mist and charges in with astounding speed. However, Shiki's dad pulls out a mist blade of his own and blocks the attack. The black mist is a unique trait possessed only by the descendants of Momotaro. And here's where the dad lore deepens. Shiki's father was actually a former member of the Momotaro Agency who once worked alongside Samudare. His name used to be Tsuyoshi Momotogawa, however, he left that life behind a long time ago so he could raise Shiki away from the agency's eyes, but unfortunately he couldn't keep Shiki hidden forever. Samudare asks Tsuyoshi if he has forgotten just how dangerous Oni truly are, but Tsuyoshi doesn't want to talk about it. All he wants to do is protect Shiki. Tsuyoshi puts up a good fight against Samudare, but Sami eventually catches him lacking, and in an instant, Tsuyoshi's chest is cut open. He falls to the ground unconscious, and Shiki is horrified by what he just witnessed. He starts yelling at Sami for hurting his dad, so Sami turns to him and prepares to finish Shiki off. But with the last bit of strength he has, Tsuyoshi grabs his leg to stop him from getting to Shiki. Semi asks why Tsuyoshi would go so far to protect an Oni kid, but he says a father doesn't need a reason to protect his son. Shiki may not be the best student or person for that matter, and he may have Oni blood in him. But he has never hurt anyone before, so Tsuyoshi asks how Semi could possibly bring himself to kill an innocent child like this. Tsuyoshi's words sting because he has been having regrets about everything he has done lately, but he doesn't want to listen to this anymore, so he summons his sword and prepares to finish Tsuyoshi off. Shiki is helpless as he watches his father about to die at the hands of Sami, and the only thought going through his head right now is how much he wants to kill Tsuyoshi. Blood begins to drip from every orifice in his body as his mind is overcome with sheer hatred, and by the time Samudera turns his attention back to Shiki, he's no longer there. The next thing Sami knows, he hears the sound of several guns getting cocked next to his head, and he is so startled that he instinctively jumps back, narrowly avoiding the attack, but he still has no idea where Shiki is. Just then, he sees a drop of blood land on the floor, so he looks up and finds an awakened Shiki hanging off the ceiling. Sami can't believe Shiki was able to awaken his Oni abilities and control his blood in such a short time, but what truly makes Oni terrifying is the fact that they lack a sense of humanity, so they are unbelievably brutal. Sami readies his sword in preparation for Shiki's next attack, but once Shiki starts firing blood missiles at him, Sami realizes this is too much for him to handle and starts running away. He eventually manages to escape the blast radius, but that doesn't mean the battle is over because Shiki emerges from the smoke and kicks Sami so hard that he is knocked into a pile of rubble and is barely conscious now. Shiki then stands over him and unleashes every weapon he has stored in his arsenal at once. The warehouse is destroyed in the mayhem, but surprisingly, Sami managed to survive the attack, and even more surprising is the fact that Shiki suddenly transforms back into a human. Shiki is confused and wonders why his entire body is covered in blood, which is a normal response given the situation, and Sami plans to take advantage of the confusion to finish Shiki off before he transforms again. He begins charging towards Shiki, while repeating that all Oni must be eliminated with no exceptions. Shiki isn't able to control his transformation at will yet, so he is pretty much a sitting duck right now. However, as his blade is about to strike, Tsuyoshi jumps out in front of him and takes the hit instead. Semi can't believe that Tsuyoshi would go as far as to sacrifice his life for an Oni, but Tsuyoshi recalls the good old days he spent with Shiki, and he honestly doesn't mind dying here since he got to live a fulfilling life. Samudera has grown tired of this fight, and all the destruction they cause is starting to draw the attention of the crowd, so since the Momotaro agency must remain secret, Samudera withdraws for now and fades away into a mass of black mist. Once Samudera is gone, Tsuyoshi collapses into Shiki's arms and Shiki is really worried about him, so he says he's going to call an ambulance, but Tsuyoshi tells him that no hospital can save him at this point. It's only a matter of time before he dies, so he would like to talk to Shiki one last time. First of all, he apologizes for keeping the truth from him all this time, but it's not exactly an easy topic to bring up in conversation. Unfortunately, he won't be here much longer, so he can't offer much in the way of support, but he tells Shiki to make sure he gets stronger in the future so he can beat both the Momotaro group and Oni so he can live a truly free life. Shiki yells at his dad for talking as if he has already died because he doesn't plan on letting that happen. He begins carrying Tsuyoshi to the hospital, and seeing Shiki show so much concern for him puts a smile on Tsuyoshi's face. But his wounds are way too severe, so after taking a few steps, Tsuyoshi loses all strength in his body and collapses to the floor. Shiki desperately begs his father to get up because he still hasn't gotten a chance to apologize and make up for all the hurtful things he said about him this morning, but it's already too late because Tsuyoshi is gone. Shiki sits there for a moment and cries over his dad's corpse, but all of a sudden, someone rolls up behind him and says he can't stay here because there will be too many witnesses. Shiki is startled, so he prepares for another fight, but before he could even turn around, he gets chopped in the neck and is knocked out instantly. It takes a lot of skill to be able to sneak up on someone with roller skates on, so Shiki clearly never stood a chance against him to begin with. Meanwhile, the leaders of the Momotaro agency are all in an uproar because they just found out about Samudera's failed attempt to eliminate Shiki, and they are starting to wonder if he has gotten weaker. But given the situation, they can't blame him for withdrawing since they can't let the public find out about their existence. However, they also don't want the public to become aware of the existence of Oni, so they plan to kill Shiki as soon as they can get their hands on him. However, that's going to be nearly impossible now because after getting knocked out, he was taken to a remote island in the middle of nowhere, and the idea is to enroll Shiki in a school full of half-Onis just like him so he can train his abilities properly. But before that, NATO is going to need to do a thorough evaluation to find out whether Shiki is going to be useful or not, and I can already tell that it's not going to be a fun experience. Shiki wakes up and finds himself shirtless and tied to a chair while the man behind him is doing push-ups on his umbrella. That's a sentence I never thought I'd have to say, but somehow, this is nowhere near the strangest thing Shiki has seen so far. The man's name is Nato, and now that Shiki is awake, he says he will begin explaining what's going on. First, he reveals his horns to show Shiki that he is an Oni just like him, and after that, he tells Shiki that he was brought here for two reasons: evaluation and retrieval. As Shiki already knows, the Momotaro agency hunts down Onis like them using the Black Mist, and the man who killed Shiki's dad was one of them. Their goal is to ultimately exterminate all Oni in the world, so to oppose them, the Oni agency was formed, and Mato's job is to find recently awakened Oni like Shiki and figure out whether he is fit to join the Oni agency. That's pretty much it, so Mato takes his board back and unties Shiki's mouth so he can ask questions. However, as soon as Shiki can speak again, he immediately starts yelling at Naito and demands to know what they've done with his father. Naito is annoyed by all of Shiki's yelling, so he deducts a few points from the evaluation and tells Shiki that his father's body was safely stored within this facility, but the guy is dead right now anyway, so it's not important. Shiki begins squirming around and trying to get himself free, but that violent behavior kind of the whole reason that Naito tied him up in the first place, so he won't be releasing him yet. Shiki is incredibly mad, but he knows yelling isn't going to get him anywhere, so he takes a moment to cool down and calmly asks Naito to release him because he has a score to settle with the guy who killed his dad. However, while his voice may have been calm, Shiki's face still looks really angry, so Naito refuses to untie him. Besides, he knows there's no way Shiki would stand a chance against a Momotaro agent, but if Shiki is so intent on getting himself killed, then Naito has a better way to evaluate him. He takes off his tie, and before Shiki can even react, Naito has snuck up behind him and proceeds to strangle Shiki with it. Basically, Shiki has to find a way out of this to pass Naito's test, and if he can't do it, then he dies. Either way, Naito doesn't really care. Shiki refuses to let himself die at the hands of some roller skate-wearing jerk, so he struggles until blood begins pooling around his eyeballs. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it out in time, so he eventually passed out. Naito is totally prepared to keep strangling Shiki until he is officially dead, but with Shiki passed out, his subconscious takes over, and he goes into Oni Berserker mode. The blood on the floor forms spikes that nearly clamp down on Naito, so he is forced to back away, and the second he takes his eyes off Shiki, he gets a machine gun pointed at his head. Shiki opens fire without hesitation, but when the dust settles, Naito is completely unharmed because he shielded himself using his blood umbrella. He can tell that Shiki hasn't learned how to control his blood powers yet because the only way he could fight was by going berserk, but this could be a good teaching moment, so Naito plans to subdue him as gently as possible. By the time Shiki regains consciousness, he finds his arm covered in blood while Naito is standing above him. He has no idea what just happened, and Naito had expected as much because when an Oni goes berserk, they lose all sense of self and destroy everything in their path, which is why this room is completely trashed right now. Shiki still doesn't understand a word that Naito is saying, and Naito is starting to think Shiki might just be stupid, but to make it as clear as possible, Naito sees Shiki as a graceless oaf who doesn't understand the first thing about controlling his blood, so he tells him he has been disqualified. Shiki is incredibly frustrated by the way things turned out, but despite all his anger, one thing is clear to him now. Naito is insanely strong, so he stands no chance of beating him. Acknowledging that hurts Shiki's ego, but he needs all the help he can get if he is going to face the Momotaro agency and get revenge for what they did to his dad. He swallows his pride and bows down to beg Naito to make him his student, but Naito is already fed up with Shiki, so he turns him down immediately. In battle, fighting without using your head means instant death, so someone like Shiki, who went berserk without thinking, would never last. He can't control his blood properly, and he's just plain stupid, so Naito doesn't want a useless student like him. Anyway, now that Naito has confirmed that Shiki is useless, he's going to have to dispose of him since he can let an incompetent berserker roam free. Shiki is stunned by what Naito just said, but from what Shiki has learned about Naito so far, he knows he's not joking, so he needs to act quickly if he wants to survive. Shiki turns around and runs away as Naito prepares his blood umbrella, but he knows he won't be able to escape before Naito attacks, which is why he begins charging at him. Naito thinks Shiki must have lost his mind since there's no way he can win a head-on confrontation. He prepares a wall of spikes to intercept Shiki, and in his head, he plans out all the possible moves Shiki could make here. He could either try to attack from the side, jump over, or retreat because he can't get through these spikes, and just as Naito had predicted, Shiki chooses to jump over the spikes. But what Naito hadn't anticipated was the fact that Shiki was able to create a gun mid-jump, so he blasts Naito in the head point blank. Shiki is proud of himself for managing to land a hit on Naito, But Nato wasn't actually injured by the blood bullet since he's still way stronger than Shiki. He is shocked that Shiki was able to control his blood, but he thinks it was just a fluke since from the looks of it, Shiki is on the verge of going berserk again. He doesn't want to have to deal with the gunslinging devil again, so Nato prepares his ultimate attack to finish Shiki off in an instant. However, to his surprise, Shiki actually manages to suppress his berserk mode and remains in control, so maybe it wasn't a fluke after all. Nato doesn't understand how Shiki managed to pull it off, so he asks Shiki for an explanation, and basically Shiki saw Nato using his ring to cut his finger so he could manifest his blood umbrella, and he just tried copying it to produce a similar effect. He pretty much just yelled at his brain to give him a gun, and eventually his arm turned into a gun, so it worked out well for him. Nato finds it hard to believe that such dumb logic was actually worked, but he can't deny that whatever Shiki did was effective. Normally, in order to avoid going berserk, an Oni would need to keep all their emotions under strict control at all times, so hotheads like Shiki usually have a hard time controlling their blood and go on a rampage. However, Shiki is different. It's more like he beat up all his emotions and made his berserk mode work for him. It's a crude method, but the power it allowed Shiki to use was certainly explosive. Shiki tells Nato that all he wants is to get strong enough to kill the man who killed his dad, so Shiki promises he will do his best to learn whatever Nato teaches him if he is willing to make him his underling. Shiki is being very sincere right now, and Nato can see that, but he still rejects Shiki's request. What Shiki did just now was nothing short of a dead man's gambit, and he had no backup plan ready in case he did end up losing control, so Nato still thinks he is incompetent. However, that doesn't mean Shiki is completely hopeless, so Nato has decided to take him in as a student after all, so he's canceling Shiki's execution. He won't explain what Shiki did to change his mind, but what's important is that he thinks Shiki has potential and he doesn't want to see that go to waste. The island they are on is called Onigashima, and at its center is a school built specifically for Oni, the Resetsu Academy. He tells Shiki that the academy is a military school which trains Oni to fight against the Momotaro Agency, but Shiki is more concerned about the fact that he's apparently on an island right now. Nato pokes Shiki in the face for talking about irrelevant stuff while he's still in the middle of his explanation, and then he goes on to state that he's the homeroom teacher at this academy, so from now on he will be in charge of Shiki and the other students. Shiki will have to live, train, and fight every other day so he can eventually handle the Momotaro agents, so he had better be ready. But Shiki's brain was overloaded by all the info Nato just dumped on him. There's still a lot that Shiki doesn't understand, but at the end of the day, he doesn't care what he has to do as long as he gets strong enough to get revenge. A little while later, Nato leads Shiki to a changing room so he can put on his new school uniform, and Shiki feels a bit odd since he didn't think he'd ever have to wear a school uniform again after he got expelled from his old school. Nato tells Shiki that there are a few other students in his class, but among all of them, Shiki is the weakest by far, so he better not pick any fights. By the way, Shiki asks Nato where his dad is, so Nato explains that they kept Shiki's dad's body in the morgue, and the arrangements for the funeral are his decision to make. Shiki's cheerful mood drops when he is reminded that his dad is dead, but Nato tells him there's no use beating yourself up over your regrets. Instead, he should focus on becoming stronger so he never has to experience that kind of regret again. With that said, Nato doesn't want to waste any more time standing around here, so he starts skating away and tells Shiki he only has 15 seconds to make it to class before he's late. Shiki doesn't think that's fair, but he doesn't have a choice, so he runs as fast as he can to catch up to him. They eventually arrive at the class door, and Shiki is trying to figure out what the coolest way to introduce himself to the class would be, but Nato hates wasting time like this, so he just kicks Shiki in and Shiki falls flat on his face, giving himself a nosebleed. Once Shiki realizes his nose is bleeding, he asks the first person he sees to give him a tissue, but Jin tells him to just shut up and be quiet. Jin's response pisses Shiki off, so he gets all up in Jin's face over it. Jin isn't the only other student in this class. There's Kuina, Juji, Homer, and Akari, a day one crash out. But right now, Shiki couldn't care less about the others because he has a score to settle with Jin. Just then, Shiki and Jin suddenly find themselves sitting next to each other with Nato standing behind them, and neither of them could sense Nato move just now, so they are both scared stiff. However, Shiki still complains that he doesn't want to have to sit next to someone like Jin. Unfortunately, Nato couldn't care less about Shiki's personal beef, so he carries on with the class announcement and informs everyone that today they will be playing a game of tag. Shiki is confused and thinks tag might be some sort of code word in this school, but no, it's just a game of tag. Nato says the students will have to make their way through the forest and arrive at the goal in order to win, but Nato will be coming after them, and anyone he catches will be expelled on the spot. To make things a little fairer, he says he won't use his blood at all, while the students are allowed to use as much blood as they want. However, he warns that if they go berserk, then he will be forced to use his blood as well, and it won't end well for them. Jin asks Naito what happens if they accidentally kill him during this game, and Naito answers that if anyone is able to kill him, they will immediately graduate and get assigned to a unit of their choice, so they are welcome to try, but he won't make it easy. Everyone seems excited about the game now that they know about the rewards, but Shiki seems a little hesitant because he still isn't used to all this. However, the little discomfort isn't going to stop him from giving it his best shot, so he tells Naito to bring it on. But before that, there's one more rule Naito forgot to mention. In order to win this game, they are going to need to have one of these balls when they cross the finish line, but handing it to them would be too simple, so Naito throws the ball's way out into the forest. He then splits everyone up into different groups, and the first group comprises Homare, Shiki, and Jin. The second group includes Ikari and Juji, and the third group will have Rokuro and Kuina. The groups with 2 members will have to fight against each other for one ball to complete the objective, but as for Shiki's group, the 3 of them are going to have to compete for 2 of the balls, and whoever fails to get ball will be expelled. Shiki tries to object because he doesn't want to be in the same group as Jin, but Naito tells him that if he doesn't want to participate in the game, then he will be expelled immediately, so now Shiki has no choice but to shut up and go along with the game. Just then, Homare walks up to Shiki and tells him he doesn't need to worry about her because she promises she won't get in his way. But while she's saying all this, the only thing going through Shiki's brain right now is, wow, a girl is actually talking to me. This is the first time anything like this has ever happened to him, so he immediately swears that he will protect Homare to the death, but she wasn't asking him to do all that, she just doesn't want to have to fight. She then goes over to Jin to ask him to take it easy on her, but Jin completely ignores her, so she breaks down in tears and tries burying her face in the dirt out of anxiety. Shiki yells at Jin for making Homare cry, but Jin tells him that if he's so interested in making friends here, then he might as well just quit now, because there's no way he's going to make it to graduation without getting expelled. Shiki retorts and says he has his reasons for being here, so he's not going to let himself be expelled until he has achieved his goals. But knowing Shiki, Jin assumes his goal must be something pointless, so he doesn't take him seriously. Hearing Jin make fun of his goals really pisses Shiki off, so when the game finally begins, he completely ignores the primary objective and chases after Jin to pick a fight with him. And Homare just stands there for a few seconds, confused, until she realizes she's supposed to run after them too. In the forest, Jin is jumping from tree to tree, focused on finding the orbs, but all of a sudden, Shiki appears behind him and tries to smack Jin over the head with a stick. He's willing to let a lot of things go, but calling his goal meaningless is something Shiki can't overlook, so he's going to have to teach Jin a lesson. Jin is annoyed by Shiki's constant harassment, but this is a competition after all, so it shouldn't be a problem if he takes the opportunity to beat Shiki to a bloody mess. He then proceeds to take off his gloves and drags his finger across his arms, creating several buzzsaws from the resulting blood. Shiki is shocked that Jin was able to use his blood powers so easily, but he can't let him know that he's impressed, so he tries to do the same thing and bites one of his fingers to draw some blood. Unfortunately, it does absolutely nothing, and yelling in his arm isn't going to make it work, so Shiki decides to just go after Jin with a regular stick. However, that goes about as well as you'd expect when you're going up bootleg Chainsaw Man, so Shiki's stick gets cut in half, and frankly, he's lucky that his head is still attached to his body. Meanwhile, Homare is walking through the forest looking for Jin and Shiki, since she heard a strange sound coming from this place, but then she trips over a branch and falls face first to the ground, giving herself a bloody nose. She then begins spiraling into depression over how useless she is, because she's way too much of a failure to stay enrolled in this school, much less graduate. For a moment, she cheers up because she remembers that Shikiseki helped her out, but that just makes her feel worse about herself because she can't do anything on her own. For now, she decides to continue heading over to the spot she heard the noises from, completely oblivious to the fact that one of the orbs was nearby the entire time. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the others can hear the sounds coming from Jin and Shiki's fight, and Ikari is starting to get really excited, so he wants to go join in. But Juji reminds them that it isn't their turn yet. Things aren't looking good for Shiki right now because on top of not being able to use his blood weapons like Jin is also way better at fighting than he is, so Shiki is getting his face pounded in. He tries his best to retaliate, but Jin is too fast for him. And before he knows it, he gets knocked to the ground. Jin is getting tired of beating Shiki up, so he tells him to just stay down so he can go complete the challenge without any more interruptions. However, Shiki refuses to give up, so Jin decides to finish him off with a blood slash, but just as the slash is about to connect, Homare happens to walk out from the bushes, putting herself right in the line of fire. Fortunately, Shiki managed to push her out of the way before anything bad could happen, but he got sliced on his arm in the process, so he's bleeding a little now. Once Homer sees this, she starts apologizing over and over again for being the reason that Shiki got hurt. Shiki tries to tell her it's alright, but Homer can't hear him because she's too busy cursing herself for being such a burden. Suddenly, her blood begins to react to her intense self-hatred, and right before Shiki's eyes, a giant blood monster is formed. Jin is just as shocked by what he sees, and he already knew that Oni have more blood in their systems than humans do, but even by Oni standards, that's a ridiculously large blood construct. Homer begs both of them to run, because if they don't, then the monster is going to kill them, and there's nothing she can do about it. While all this is going down, Nato is somewhere else in the forest, waiting for the students to get their act together, when all of a sudden, he is visited by the school principal. The principal says he's surprised that Nato chose to give the new students a life-or-death mission on their very first day when they were supposed to be going through orientation, but Nato thought a practical experience would be more efficient than sitting in a classroom to explain things to them. Several Oni die every year, and some people are killed simply for being related to an Oni, but the really unlucky ones are those who get taken alive and used as test subjects for the Momotaro Agency. Those children committed no crime, and most of them don't even know they're Oni, yet they're slaughtered all the same. It is a true tragedy, and the principal hopes those poor kids get to go to a decent afterlife, but Nato doesn't think about things that way since he believes that as long as he is strong enough, he won't die at the hands of any Momotaro agent. The principal kind of agrees with Nato's ideology, so he asks him to make his students as strong as possible so they can survive. Back on the battlefield, Shiki managed to escape the monster's attack and Jin rushed in to destroy it, but the monster's body is too thick for him to cut all the way through with his buzzsaws. Shiki calls out to Homer and asks her to do something about her monster, but unfortunately, she doesn't have any control over it, and she's too weak to do anything right now. Homer passes out shortly after, so Shiki runs over because he wants to get her away from the monster as soon as possible. However, as he approaches, the monster stops attacking and starts instinctively protecting Homer, so it's almost as if her blood has a will of its own. The blood monster clearly sees Shiki and Jin as a threat, so it spits up a ton of blood and floods the area with it. There's no way that was an efficient use of Homer's blood, and even if she has more blood than the average Oni, her supply has got to be running low, so even though she's begging Shiki to run and leave her behind, he refuses. He's already watched someone he cares about die right before his eyes, and it really sucks, so he's not going to let her die here. The monster covers Homer and lets out a scream that everyone in the forest can hear, and it's enough to draw Nato's attention. But he doesn't intend to get involved because he wants to see how the kids will handle it on their own. Shiki attempts to release his blood by dragging his hand against the floor like he did against Nato, but Nato can already tell that it won't work out for him this time. It was a 1 in 100 miracle that Shiki was able to pull it off earlier with no formal training or understanding of how blood release works, but his luck can't last forever. Shiki realizes he is completely powerless to help in this situation, and he feels incredibly frustrated because it was the same when he couldn't save his dad. But while Shiki is having his crisis, Jin tells him to stop crying like a baby and walks up to deal with the monster on his own. He digs both thumbs into his arms, creating a chainsaw in one and a buzzsaw in the other. Nato sees this, and he is really impressed because forming two different weapons at the same time requires an extraordinary amount of blood control. And Oni's blood can take any strength or shape required by its user as long as they have a clear image of what they want to create. Often the way blood manifests itself is linked to past traumas or personal preferences and tastes, so it is often said that a blood release offers a glimpse at what kind of person an Oni is. Jin runs up the monster's arm, and once he is close enough to its head, he tries slashing it off with his chainsaw. However, at the last second, it managed to protect itself by sacrificing one of its arms, so Jin has a lot of work ahead of him. And while Jin is busy saving the day, Shiki is stuck on the sidelines, so he feels like an absolute loser. He doesn't understand how Jin is able to use his blood release so easily when Shiki can't get anything to manifest at all. However, just then, he notices something he hadn't thought of before. Every weapon that Jin has created is cutting related, and Homer's blood release must be the monster that is trying to protect her. So maybe the blood release is unique to each individual, and if that's the case, then he knows exactly what his blood release is going to be now. Jin is still doing his best to fight the monster, but he gets caught off guard when it suddenly yells at him and blows out his eardrums, so he is down for the count. Mego assumes this must be Jin's limit, so he is finally ready to step in and save the kids, but before he could do so, Shiki yells from behind Jin. So Jin turns around and he is shocked to see Shiki with a giant blood gun strapped to his arm. The monster tries squashing Shiki as soon as it notices him, but he manages to dodge and braces himself against the ground before firing a blast that completely obliterates the blood monster in one go. The power of that blast was so immense that it actually somehow made it start raining, even though that doesn't really make much sense. But as impressive as it took a lot out of Shiki, so a moment later he falls to the ground. Naito walks over and tells Shiki he used way too much blood in one go, so his control still needs a lot of work. But even for someone who had to use all his blood for one attack, that level of power output was insane. Naito tells Shiki that worst case scenario, using too much blood can kill him, but Shiki already assumed that would be the case, which is exactly why he wanted to save Homare so badly. He asks Naito to take care of her first, because she needs the help more than he does right now, but before Naito can do anything, Jin comes out of nowhere and tries to slice Naito's head off his body, but Naito was quick enough to react, so he forces Jin to retreat. Naito tells him that Homare needs emergency treatment, so this really isn't the time for a fight, but Jin couldn't care less about her condition. He just wants to know if the offer Naito said earlier is still on the table. Naito confirms that if Jin can kill him, he will graduate immediately and be sent to any squad of his choosing, but that's only if he can pull it off. Jin charges at Naito and tries to slash him with his blood saws, but Naito uses his umbrella to parry the strikes and taunts him, saying his half-baked saws will never cut through his umbrella. Jin takes that as a personal challenge, so he runs in to try and cut through the umbrella, but Naito points out that there's a lot more to his umbrella than just deflecting attacks. He flicks a switch, releasing smoke from the umbrella's ferrule, but he assures Jin that it isn't poisonous, so he doesn't need to worry about breathing it in. But it is still hard to see through, so Jin assumes Naito is going to try and sneak attack him now that his vision is obscured. He prepares himself to counterattack as soon as Naito gets close enough, but before he can even react, he gets shot in the arm 3 times. He runs behind a tree for cover, and we see that Naito turned his umbrella into a rifle and is shooting at Jin. The bullets are rubber, so Jin's life isn't in danger, but it still hurts like hell, so Naito is going to keep sniping at him until he goes down. Jin admits that this makes it difficult for him to fight back, but he isn't out of tricks yet, so he creates a few more saws on his arm. And this time, he flings them at Naito as projectiles. Naito is impressed that Jin thought ahead to have an attack plan for long-distance fights, but it's still not enough because when Jin tries to sneak up on him mid-air, Naito just casually throws a grenade at him, and he wasn't prepared for that at all. Luckily for him, it was just a smoke grenade so he doesn't blow up, but now he can't see anymore, so he braces himself because he thinks Naito is going to fire more shots at him. But on the contrary, Naito runs up behind him and blows Jin's back out with a punch to the spine. He even had him using those advanced ragdoll physics, but Jin refuses to give up. Naito tells him it was foolish to think he could win even though he was already injured from his fight with Homare's monster, and on top of that, he has already used way too much blood, so he can barely move. He uses his umbrella to pin Jin to the ground and tells him that if this were a real battle, that he would have died multiple times over by now. He asks him if he's really that desperate to see his father again, but hearing that from Naito sends Jin into shock because he doesn't know how he found out about that. Naito explains that he did a little background search on Jin, so he knows a lot of things about him. Like the fact that his father is a Momotaro agent, and that as soon as Jin's dad found out that his wife and children had Oni blood, he slaughtered them all without a second thought, leaving Jin as the only survivor. The scars all over Jin's body are a reminder of what his father did to his family, and the years he had to spend scraping by on whatever trash he could stomach, so he's never going to give up until he finds his father and brings him down with his own 2 hands, even if it kills him. Naito had no problem with Jin's goal up until now, but that last part about dying really pissed him off. So he slams Jin's head into the ground and tells him there's no point in having a goal if you don't live to see it through. A little while later, Naito calls the school nurse to come out here and take care of Homare since she's still unconscious and can't participate in the trial anymore. As for Jin, Naito tied him to a tree to keep him from causing any more trouble. That leaves Shiki as the final participant, and luckily he has regained enough strength to move again. So Naito tells him he still has to grab a ball and head to the finish line. And it just so happens that Naito has one of the balls with him right now, so Shiki has 2 choices here. Either he can fight Naito and take the ball in his hand, or he can run away and go looking for the ball that's still in the forest. Shiki looks at Naito for a few seconds, and then he starts running because there's no way he's beating Naito in his current state. Naito gives him a little head start and then starts chasing him down, but Shiki actually circles back and shows up next to Jin. He knows he can't beat Naito on his own, but if the 2 of them work together, then they might have a shot, so he offers to free Jin as long as he helps him out. Jin initially refuses because he thinks it would be humiliating to accept help from Shiki, but Shiki tells him pride isn't going to help him achieve his goal. Not that it matters much, but Shiki's family was killed by a Momotaro, so he and Jin have that in common, and if it will help him get his revenge, Shiki is willing to work with anyone, even if it's someone like Jin. Naito is still running through the forest, looking for Shiki, and eventually he spots him running in the direction of the finish line, so he cuts him off. Shiki stops in his tracks once he sees Nato, and Nato reminds him that even if he makes it to the finish line, it won't count unless he has one of the balls with him. But just as he says this, Jin jumps down from one of the trees and tries to tackle Nato. Nato sees it coming, so he is able to dodge, but he is honestly surprised that Jin and Shiki put their differences aside to work together. He thinks their plan might have actually worked if they hadn't already used up all of their blood, but they actually came prepared with a backup plan. Jin has a rock tied to a rope on his arm, and before Naito can react, he has already been tied up with it. Shiki then grabs the other end, and together, he and Jin try and make Naito lose his balance. Naito admits that it's a decent plan, but since they are already tired, there's no way they can overpower him now. However, it turns out that Jin had a little more left in the tank after all, so he launches a blood saw at Naito, forcing him to dodge and lose his solid footing. Now that he is off balance, Shiki runs in and smacks the ball out of his hand as soon as he can. The ball rolls over to Jin, and Naito is impressed that they were actually able to get it from him. But he believes that Jin and Shiki will start fighting over who gets the ball soon enough, so he will just get it back from them before they can get to the finish line. However, to his surprise, Shiki just seems happy that he got the ball away from Naito, so he yells for Jin to take it and start running before Naito can chase after him. Jin is just as shocked as Naito is, but he does take the ball and starts making his way to the finish line, all while Shiki cheers him on. Once Jin is gone, Shiki rubs it in Naito's face that they beat him, but Naito reminds him that if Jin makes it to the finish line like this, then he will be the only one to pass the test and Shiki will end up getting expelled. Shiki has completely forgotten about that rule, and he is devastated, but Jin is already long gone, so there's no way he can get the ball back now. Meanwhile, Jin is running through the forest, and he is confident that he can make it to the finish line in time, but then he remembers how Shiki helped him, and he knows he couldn't have gotten this far without that idiot's help, so he doesn't feel right claiming victory this way. He turns around and yells that he'd rather get expelled than win by using someone else, so he's going to give the ball to Shiki. But just then, a little red mascot thing runs out in front of them. Naito tells them that this is Muku, and he's one of the Oni agency's messengers from Baku Express. He delivers messages efficiently and without a trace, but for him to be here, something really important must be going down. Naito plays the message, and he realizes it's a distress signal from the Kyoto branch. They are currently under attack by the Momotaro agency, and they need immediate backup, so Naito needs to head over there immediately. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the others have been waiting for their turn for a long time now, and they are starting to wonder if the others died in there or something. But then they see Naito, Shiki, and Jin running out. Juji notices that Homer isn't with them, so Naito explains that she is in critical condition, so she was sent to the infirmary so she can recover. But that's not important right now because they just got a distress call from Kyoto, so Naito tells them that today's training is officially cancelled, and everyone here will be coming with him to the Kyoto branch. Within a few hours, they are all loaded onto a boat, but Juji still isn't clear on the details, so he asks Naito if they are really going to the Kyoto branch that's still actively under attack. Naito tells them they have no choice because all the other classes are currently away on field exercises, so there's no one else available to help. But he tells everyone that they don't need to worry too much, since they'll only be doing support tasks while they are out there. Kuina asks why he made them wear these dumb uniforms, so Naito explains that the normal Oni school uniforms stand out too much, and they can't risk drawing too much attention to themselves, so from now on he wants everyone here to act like regular students. Rokuro then asks what Naito meant by support roles, so Naito explains that each municipality has at least one Oni agency unit, and those units have two main responsibilities. The first is to fight on the front lines against the Momotaro agency whenever they show up, and the second is to provide support where necessary. They help the Oni who live among humans and make sure they aren't discovered by the Momotaro agency. And since Oni can't go to regular doctors, the Oni agency also provides free healthcare and emergency medical attention to any Oni that is injured in battle, and that's what they are going to be doing once they get there. Shiki is a little upset that he is being relegated to support duty when this could be his chance to get revenge, but Naito already knows what he's thinking, so he tells him that the agent he is looking for isn't in Kyoto. The Momotaro agency also has regional operations, and the agent that's currently stationed in Kyoto, well, let's just say he's not mentally stable. Once they arrive in Kyoto, Naito leads them all to a little restaurant near Iryuta Temple, and Shiki is confused, so he asks him if he's sure this is the right place since they were supposed to be heading to the secret Oni base. However, moments later, the owner comes out to greet them and she says she has been expecting them. She leads the group to a room and opens a secret hatch that leads underground to the Oni base. Meanwhile, out on the battlefield, Team 3 of the Oni squad has been wiped out by Captain Tsubakiri and his subordinate, Yomoji. Subakiri overhears a radio transmission from Oni HQ trying to check in on Team 3, and he thinks it's pathetic how the Oni are trying to play military, but it does make it more fun when he cuts them down. Yomoji tells Subakiri that he may have gone a little overboard this time because the cleanup for the mess he made is going to take forever. Subakiri apologizes, but he just gets so infuriated when he sees Oni trying to blend in with humans that he can't help himself. He is also a little disappointed that he couldn't get his hands on a female Oni because his last female test subject died last week and he needs a new one. Yomoji hates Oni a lot, but she has seen what Subakiri does to them for his experiments, and it haunts her to this day. Subakiri tells her it's rude to talk about his work like that, but Yomoji has every right to say it's disgusting, especially since one of his experiments is standing right behind him. And it's so bad that Subakiri even nicknamed it Ugly. Subakiri says Ugly is a mix between a monkey, a dog, and a bird, and while it does look revolting, it's the ultimate biological weapon since it only eats Oni. Yomoji doesn't really care what Subakiri does with his free time, but she reminds him that their job is to protect the civilians from dangerous Oni, not to perform horrific experiments. Suba understands that, but he has always been fascinated by the properties of Oni blood and the way it can be controlled. Yomoji points out that they have similar powers to the Oni, so Suba could easily research that instead. He admits that she's right, but the experiments really hurt, so Suba would much rather use a disposable specimen like an Oni. While Subakiri was busy talking about all the gruesome experiments he has been doing, a terrified Oni boy has been hiding behind a pillar. Subakiri says he's going to move on to the next area, so the boy breathes a sigh of relief, thinking he is finally safe. However, Subakiri shows up right in front of the boy because he knew he was hiding there the entire time. He thinks this is a stroke of good luck since he was running low on Oni children to experiment on, and since he plans to take this one back to base, Yomoji offers to knock it out for him. She begins punching the boy to make him pass out, but while she's doing that, a drop of blood happens to splatter on Suba's shirt, and Suba seems personally offended by this. He may be fascinated by Oni blood, but the mere thought of having it touch him is absolutely revolting. Not to mention the fact that dry cleaning a white suit is hella expensive. He then proceeds to stomp the shit out of that kid. For daring to bleed on his uniform and for extra psychological damage, he asks the boy if he still remembers what his parents look like, because he's going to have to point them out from all the corpses here. The boy is so horrified that he can't speak, so Subakiri loses interest and decides to finish him off by ordering the corpses to go squish the boy to death. All Momotaro agents have the ability to fight with a black bacteria in their bodies. Some can make weapons, others can launch spores, but Subakiri's ability is particularly disturbing because it allows him to control corpses with his bacteria. At the same time, Nato is leading Shiki and the others through the tunnel system underneath Iryuta, until they eventually arrive at the Oni base located further down. This place is so far underground that no Momotaro agent would ever think to come looking for it. Once they walk in, they find Kyoya in the middle of his break, and he is really happy to see Naito and the others, especially Quina since he almost never gets to meet new girls, so he asks her for her number, but she turns him down immediately. The others ask Naito who this flirty guy is, so Naito explains that he is the head of this support unit, and both of them used to be classmates back in the day. Anyway, now that introductions have been made, Naito tells everyone to stay here while he heads out to the front lines. Just then, Kyoe's assistant comes looking for him, and when she sees the students here, she tells them all to hurry up and get changed because they need all the help they can get right now. She sounds really serious, so Rup does as she says, and they are all led through the facility's sick bay. Shiki and the others are shocked to see so many injured people at once, so the assistant explains that this is a result of the current battle against the Momotaro Agency. And the people here are actually the lucky ones who managed to survive. They eventually arrive at the bedside of the patient whom Kyoe's assistant called him to come treat. This man is missing both arms, legs, and his lungs are pretty much cooked, so at best he's got 3 minutes to live as things are now. Kyoe calmly tells the man that he's not going to die today, but Shiki calls him out because he doesn't think it's fair to lie to a dying man like that. However, there's a reason Kyoe is in charge of operations here, and he wasn't lying when he said he could save the man, so he prepares to show the kids what this kind of work really looks like. Meanwhile, out on the battlefield, Subakiri and Yomoji have just cornered another group of Oni, and they've already taken out the strongest of the bunch, so there's no way the remaining low-level grunts will be able to handle them. It looks like it's going to be another massacre, but just before Subakiri and Yomoji begin their attack, Naito shows up, and he immediately uses his blood to launch a counterattack against Subakiri, but unfortunately, he was able to shield himself by using a few of the dead Oni lying around. This isn't the first time Subakiri has run into Naito, but he was fairly certain that Kyoto wasn't his territory, so he's surprised to see him here. Anyway, since Meido is here, Sobakiri asks him if he knows anything about a place where Oni hide in Kyoto, because a bunch of the Oni he's been trying to kill have been escaping. Meido denies knowing anything about that, and Sobakiri has no proof that there's a hidden facility in the first place, but that won't stop him from searching the city until he finds it. Meido knows it'll cause a lot of trouble if Sobakiri manages to locate the Oni base, so he needs to deal with him immediately. While that's happening, back at the clinic, Kyoya is done preparing for the procedure. Shiki is confused since he thought the blood transfusions were meant to go to the patient, but Kyoya's assistant tells him to just be quiet and watch. The lungs obviously need to be healed, but there's a limit to how much Kyoya can do in one sitting, so before he begins, he asks the patient whether he wants to have his arms or legs back. The man can barely speak at this point, but he gathers the energy to tell Kyoya that he wants to get his arms back so he can hold his kids again. Kyoya understands, so he assures the man that he'll be able to hold his children again in no time, but fair warning, the procedure is going to hurt like hell, so he's going to need to brace himself for the pain. Now that they are clear on the details, Kyoya slits his wrist and begins pouring blood straight into the man's mouth to heal him. Kyoya's blood is practically useless when it comes to a fight, but if applied to another Oni, it increases their regenerative ability several times over, allowing most to recover from even the most severe injuries. After swallowing some of Kyoya's blood, the man begins experiencing excruciating pain, so Kyoya's assistant asks the boys to hold him still until the procedure is done. And while Shiki-sama is doing that, she asks the others to go get some more blood from the other room. It takes a while, but the man's nub begins to move as new fingers are formed, and before long, the man's arms are completely regenerated, along with his lungs. Shiki is amazed by what he just saw, so he asks Kyoya if he can do the same thing for the man's legs. Kyoya says that as long as the man takes regular doses of his blood, that his legs will grow back eventually, and the reason he didn't just do it all at once is because overusing his blood reduces its effectiveness for the patient. Kyoya tells the man that his life is no longer in danger, but he's likely going to have to retire from the battle unit after this injury, but he is always welcome to come work in the support unit. Kyoya even offers to hook him up with a prosthetic leg in the meantime so he can run around with his kids again, and the man is so touched by his kindness that it brings him to tears. Kyoya tells everyone that this is the reality of what it means to fight on the front lines, and if they aren't careful, they may very well end up in the same condition as this man. He understands that they all have their reasons for wanting to fight in the battle unit, but he wanted them to remember that the people fighting out on the front lines can only keep moving forward because they know they have the support unit backing them up. Seeing all this has motivated Shiki to do his best, so he tells Kyoya that he's willing to do anything to help. However, Kyoya actually has a different job in mind for Shiki. He leads Shiki over to a little girl who is staring blankly into the garden, and he explains that the girl's name is Mei. They rescued her from an attack earlier today, but her parents haven't been found yet, which is why she is catatonic. Kyoya can tell that Shiki is a kind person, so he asks him to look after Mei for a little bit. Shiki thinks he can handle that, so he goes over to Mei and tries to start a light-hearted conversation, but Mei isn't responding to anything he says. He eventually asks her if she wants to go to Aruna with him. And this gets Mei's attention because she has never heard of that place before, so she asks him what it is. Shiki is glad that she finally spoke to him, but he's a little surprised that she's never heard of Aruna since it's common knowledge. Just then, Shiki hears a lot of footsteps nearby, so he and Mei go to check it out, and they see the support unit carrying a bunch of bodies in. Kyoya's assistant explains that the patrol unit came across a large pile of bodies in their usual route, so there are around 30 here, and it just so happens that the corpses of Mei's parents were among the bodies because she breaks down in tears as soon as she sees them. Back on the battlefield, Nato is getting ready to attack, but before he does, Sobakiri asks him if the present he left has been received yet. Mendo is confused, so he asks what he means, and Sobakiri explains that he already knew he'd never be able to find the Oni base on his own, which is why he infected a couple of corpses with his black bacteria and left them out in the open. That way, when the corpses are retrieved, they'd inevitably be brought back to the base of operations, giving Subakiri direct access. In fact, by his calculations, the bodies should have arrived by now, so he decides to give them a quick test run. Over in the base, Mei is still grieving over her dead parents when Subakiri takes control of her father's body. At first, Mei is delighted because she thinks her father managed to survive somehow, but then she takes a look at his eyes, and they are completely black and soulless. It takes a few moments for Shiki and Kyoya to notice the body choking Mei, but when they finally see it, Kyoya immediately recognizes it as Subakiri's ability, so he asks Shiki to cover Mei's eyes while he takes care of it. Shiki doesn't understand what's going on, but he does it anyway, and once Mei's vision is blocked, Kyoya takes 2 scalpels and lobotomizes Mei's dad. The only way to stop a corpse once Subakiri has taken control of it is to destroy the brain. And Kyoya soon comes to the realization that if this corpse was infected, and the rest that were brought in are probably infected as well. This was the end of episode 5. Subscribe to not miss the next part.